Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dean. It is great to be here. As Dean mentioned, I spent the first decade of my career writing a ton of code. I loved being an open source developer. I loved the work that we were doing back then at Xerox PARC in creating this new programming language of bringing basically business concerns into the code, into the software. Because so often we realized our software architectures were really all about these technical concerns. And through this process, I actually did get that case of RSI because I started coding so much, working these very long nights, doing those death marches to releases because I was very passionate about what I was doing. And I realized that, as Dean mentioned, I was just thrashing. I was switching between windows and doing things. And I realized that thrashing was actually coming from the disconnect between the value stream, what we now think of as value stream, the features I was working on, the changes in priorities, switching to a defect or a high priority incident, and the source code, the code base. So I became really interested in this problem, and I started actually doing more research on it, started doing my PhD on it. And I realized that the software architectures and the programming languages that we have are actually very much disconnected from the way that work flows, especially in large organizations. So I started studying professional developers. My PhD supervisor and I, Gail Murphy, we started Tasktop as a company that could learn how to apply these concepts of connecting value streams and software architectures could actually work at scale. And then I learned these two really interesting lessons. So number one, that things work very differently in enterprise IT organizations at scale. That the sort of productivity I saw in open source, it seems to get 100 times or 1,000 times slower when I walked into these enterprise organizations and I saw how value streams were constructed, how they were connected, and how people worked. So I thought there was a pretty big problem here because we've learned all these practices back then. You know, when I was at PARC, I started in '99. We had extreme programming, we had continuous delivery, and we had this amazing fast rate of feature flow. This, by the way, is why open source projects with only a handful of developers actually create some of the underpinnings of all the major software that we use across organizations today. So the other thing I learned, and think back to yesterday's amazing session by Jade Simmons, was that the technologists that I was meeting with and the leaders, the business leaders I was meeting with, were speaking completely different languages. Jade told us that it really is about relating to your audience. You heard more of that in the last session, but these were completely different languages that were being spoken. The language of agility, the language of things like deploys per day, and then this language that we had on the business side. And they weren't quite compatible. They weren't really relatable. So through all those meetings, through all those air miles, this is actually a terrible I love the proxy metric and vanity metric of lines of code written. The one of millions of air miles is a much less fun one, but it did teach me about this major disconnect and the fact that we really need to get these two sides of the organization to be one organization, to create, as Dean said, and as you'll hear today, the second operating system that connects us to the customer and to value delivery. And so that's really the goal of this flow framework in the book, Project to Product, that I'll tell you about today. And I'll get started with one of the key stories in Project to Product, the one that was something that, the one where I really learned how difficult these large-scale transformations can be when we don't have a consistent notion of value and of flow. So now think back to 2007. That was my phone in 2007. It was basically, for me, the pinnacle of Nokia's ability to make these super cool phones. I dropped it 2 stories and it still worked, which has not been true with any of my phones since then. But Nokia, the really interesting thing about Nokia back then is they realized a year before we all did that something was going to change fundamentally with phones because there was going to be these large glass capacitive touch screens and Apple was going to be making the thing called the iPhone. And then with that, they realized that our experience with a mobile phone was going to be basically driven by software. It was no longer going to be physical buttons. It was going to be the widgets and the app stores and those sorts of things. So they knew all that. I think a lot of people think that they basically missed that revolution by not realizing that they needed big glass screens. But it was actually, they were realizing there was going to be software that was their bottleneck. And they embraced agility with a kind of fervor and the kind of motivation that we really see in so many organizations today. So they got completely behind it. They brought in some of the best consultants. They kept hiring more developers. They realized that they needed to become software innovators and to move faster. Now, they actually became, it was a fascinating experience for me. My first Agile conference was in 2009, and I was talking about how we were using Agile in open source. I was walking from room to room, and I kept seeing this company called Nokia, who was being used as a poster child of a definitive proof point of how Agile works at scale. So if you do what Nokia did, you'll be perfectly Agile, end of story. Nokia and Nokia Siemens Networks actually developed a test for agility. So the test was basically your adoption of Scrum methodologies and your adoption of Agile tools, and whether you were trained on Scrum. So this turned out to be quite disconnected in terms of how they were measuring their agility and how value was actually flowing in the organization. It is what we call now a local optimization of the value stream. So the fact that developers were trained on Agile, they were using Agile tools, using Agile methods, but nothing was moving faster. Yet the business, the CEO at the time, was actually measuring the transformation. All of the executives were measuring the transformation through these metrics of whether people were trained on Agile and whether they were using the tool chain. So this weird thing was happening because to the board, to the CEO, to all leadership, it looked like the whole transformation was on track. But then I was actually working with the individual developers and development managers across the organization at the time, trying to help them use our tools. And I realized that none of this was actually solving their core problem. Their core problem was with their software architecture. Back then it was the Symbian operating system between the Series 40 and Series 60 that could not possibly fill that screen effectively, that could not possibly support an app store. That operating system platform had a lot of technical debt, but the transformation was really just do more features, be more agile, rather than giving those engineers who knew they had to do some replatforming, who knew they had these piles of technical debt. So the technical people actually understood this perfectly. There were even some whistleblowers that went right to the board of Nokia. They never had the opportunity to do the replatforming and the technical debt investment that could have potentially saved that company. By the time this was said and done, Stephen Ellup then came in, realized that there was a burning platform, issued that infamous memo. 99% of the value of Nokia's mobile business was destroyed. They completely failed to modernize, even though they tried to do the right things, even though the people who were there were trying to do the best for the company. So I realized from this that this false sense of security and this inability for the business people to relate to what the technical people understood and saw actually was the key contributor to destroying this transformation. Because both sides wanted the right thing, but they didn't have that common language, that common picture that would allow them to relate to themselves. So I realized that these silos of basically saying Agile is just how your development teams work, and then these proxy metrics, they will actually destroy and derail transformations by giving you the wrong sense of security and making it too easy to just invest in the wrong things and really going against the core principles of safe and lean Agile, which is bringing these concepts to the business, to your end-to-end value streams. So here's another story, and this is basically a decade later. I would have thought we would have learned at this point, but this organization, this is detailed in the book as well, this is the top 25 bank by revenue. They're on their third transformation, and now everything's going to be better because now it's with DevOps. So the fascinating thing about this was that this time, this is the IT budgets with software eating the world and such things, are getting so large at these organizations because they're all needing, as are your organizations, to compete on their software delivery capabilities. So not only does this organization have a multi-billion-dollar IT budget, this transformation had a budget of $1 billion. So it's highly consequential, everyone's motivated to make it work. And then I saw something that felt really similar to what was happening at Nokia, which is there was this project management layer, which is the way the success of the transformation was being measured. And 2 years later, so the first two transformations failed, some executives got ushered out the door, and 2 years later, I'm now doing the same kind of interviews I was doing at Nokia, and I'm learning that the consensus is that now IT, the transformation's been successful, by the way, now IT is delivering less to the business than it was before. So the business partners, the lines of business are even more frustrated. It's been this 2-year retooling, replatforming, deployment of DevOps and Agile, and the business feels like they're getting even less than they were before. So there's just something so fundamentally wrong about the way this was managed, because of course, again, everyone was motivated to make this succeed, but there was just something wrong about the way it was measured. Through the conversations around this, I got introduced to the concept in project management called watermelon projects, which is they're all green on the outside and red on the inside. And this was one of those. So the transformation was managed to cost, and it succeeded at reducing cost. It was managed through a set of activities. It succeeded, like deploying those, the new tools and processes. It succeeded those activities, but there was no value metric. Value was not being measured. So there's, again, something very wrong because we can't manage what we can't measure at the business level, and there was no measurement of value, and that's why I believe really led this astray. So this is actually getting quite serious because some companies in our economy have actually become very good at measuring and tracking value delivery. This is the stock price change over a decade between Amazon and other retailers. Right? We had an early warning sign with Nokia. We're now having other warning signs, and pretty significant ones, with retailers, each of whom, by the way, is undergoing Agile and DevOps transformations as we speak. But again, something is off because you've got Amazon, who has its basically organizational structure aligned to its product value streams and aligned to its software architecture, and can innovate, can manage billion-line code bases and innovate at a pace that so far outpaces these other organizations that they're able to actually take over entire markets and then basically create a disruption machine that can then move into other markets. Now, at the current rate of disruption, this has now started happening fast enough, half of the S&P 500 will actually be replaced over the next 10 years if these things continue. So this is a pretty large and urgent thing in terms of have and have-nots of innovation in software. It's happening to institutions such as banks as well. So tech is now moving in. There needs to be more growth for the tech companies. So they're actually moving in on banks. And this was just a fascinating study that I read on Bloomberg a few months ago, where banks have now spent about $1 trillion on digital transformation. So that's probably over 1% of the global economy on their digital transformations, but there are no measurable results. So again, there's something very wrong with the fact that we can't measure and determine whether these things are actually working or not. What motivated me to write that book is seeing basically what felt to me like $1 billion of wealth go up in flames, even with the best of intentions, and now we're talking about potentially $1 trillion. So again, I think we all know where organizations need to go, but without that common understanding of value, these businesses can't get there. Our organizations can't get there. So I did get to wondering whether this was happened before. And have we been through these other waves of mass extinction and disruption and so on? And this is exactly what Dean introduced to you yesterday, that we've actually had these 5 different waves. Dr. Claudia Perez published this book in 2002 called Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital. And I'll just really quickly recap what Dean said, that in each of these waves, which happens approximately every 50 years, there's an installation period where there's this big frenzy. Some new means of production becomes very cheap. So that could be railroads, that could be Ford's car production lines. And then there's this frenzy of financial capital, of venture capitalists and the like, wanting to make a big return on that new means of production. So about 100 years ago, just in Detroit alone, there were over 300 car startups. Just the same way we have all these fintech startups and insurtech startups. We have startups across all these sectors. And all this innovation. And this is, by the way, why, for the majority of our careers, it feels like the tech scene's been so crazy, because there has been all this invention. There has been all these changes. We constantly have new frameworks and toolkits and methodologies and cloud runtimes and so on. Then you get to this turning point where you actually end up with these mass extinctions where businesses from the last stage will go extinct because they can no longer compete. They have not adapted. Where some of those startups from the installation period actually become the new large companies, and where this creative destruction creates basically the new giants. So these are the FANGs, companies like Microsoft, the BATs in China, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. It so happens that there's only enough capital today and the right structures in Canada, in the United States and in China to actually foster these tech giants. So there are approximately 9 of them, and basically the amount of wealth they've been able to accumulate by becoming so innovative and so good at managing software is now equivalent to the world's 3rd largest economy, to the economy of Japan. So then, after this turning point, by the way, Dr. Perez, all the research that I've done, basically still puts us somewhere in the middle or towards the edge of this turning point. We're not yet in the deployment period. What happens in the deployment period is that other companies, the rest of the economy, learn how to adapt those new production techniques. So we go from a world where today, there are only a handful of companies that can effectively, at a business level, manage billion-line code bases. And other companies learn how to do this as well. So really, the whole point of this talk is to think about, to take the inspiration you've had from this conference and help you apply it to make your company one of the ones that makes it to that period of wealth generation through the turning point into the deployment period. And spoiler alert, project management won't be how you get there. So in each of these revolutions, there have been new managerial principles. There have been factory systems, subcontracting, Taylorism, where we learn how to treat people as mindless cogs in the machine. That can actually work, it turns out, for building dams and bridges, and Gantt charts were innovated for making things like the Hoover Dam. But then Henry Ford realized, well, that doesn't really work when you need to have this fast-paced, high-quality production. You need to train and invest in your employees. You need them to have a way to signal that something's wrong with production, and have things like the andon cord. And so we really need to move away from this and to move to a managerial system that actually supports innovation. And in thinking about this, I actually decided that I want to learn how one of the companies had survived the last turning point. BMW Group is one of the car brands that did survive. They were one of the giants that's still around. They're very interesting because they're also trying to transition now to the age of digital, the age of electric cars. So we were working with them on that, and they invited me for a 2-day tour of the Leipzig plant, which was the most eye-opening thing to me ever. I'd read all the lean books. I've read every word of the Safe 4.5 reference manual, Toyota production system books, and so on. And the concepts are there, but seeing these things actually live and in action, seeing and feeling the culture was something else. So there was not a Gantt chart in sight, but everything that I saw there was all around tracking and measuring and the culture of flow. So one thing I should mention, by the way, that I think in IT, one of the, I think we've got kind of two concerns that make it hard for us, and especially our business leaders, to relate to production. A, we can't really see what we produce. Typically, it's really hard to know what flows. And B, we think we just have it really hard because of the complexity of our software systems, the legacy. So the complexity of this plant, I think, rivals almost anything that we see in our IT systems. There are almost 900 cars delivered off this plant every day. They drive off the plant. They drive off in the exact same order as they were ordered by dealerships and individuals. It's called just-in-sequence manufacturing, in addition to the just-in-time delivery, and so on. So what was so interesting to me is that this plant embodied the lean principles in a way I'd just never seen before. And again, especially at the level of the business, the way that all the leaders of the plant, the CEO of the plant spoke. And the lean principles from James Womack's book, just to recap them quickly here, are precisely specify value by product. You'll note, as Dean reminded us, the word project is not in the same framework, in the same framework. It's all about product because products embody value from the customer's point of view. Identify the value stream for each product, so how you actually deliver value across your organization. Make value flow without interruptions, that's how you pursue excellence. And then, this is the key one, let the customer pull value from the producer. So the units of value have to be about what the customer pulls. And this could not be more viscerally embodied than in this BMW Leipzig plant, in their flagship plant. You'll actually see the value streams. I was looking at my phone and the satellite view. The value streams are visible from space. So that thing they call the 5-finger structure, it kind of looks like your hand on its side. And this is the 1 and 2 series value stream. So this thing is all geared up for delivering revenue, the top line of BMW. It's all about automation. Every manufacturing step takes only 70 seconds. And it was really interesting. On my watch, I saw I had walked about 7 miles of this production line. It's just an incredible production line in terms of size and scope and the level of automation. The thing that blew my mind was that car that you saw on my first slide, the i8, the yesterday's car of the future at this point. That line was only the width of this building. So that line was probably about a little bit less wide than this hall. Every manufacturing step took 30 minutes. And there was not much automation. And I was wondering why, because this car seems so much more complex than actually the 1 and 2 series. And it's because that value stream is not optimized for top line, it was optimized for learning. They want to learn how to build manufacturing cars. Tesla was obviously a pretty significant disruptive force in the industry. and they were learning how to build electric cars within that line. The i3 was kind of in the middle, as much as the longer side of the building. But basically, these value streams have a very clear business result, have different flow requirements, and the architecture is all around flow. So now it's trying to contrast this between what we see in today's enterprise IT organizations and how car production works at BMW. So first of all, everything is around integrated production lines. If they saw how we do things in IT today, they would think it'd be as if we're taking a bucket of parts and taking it from one station and dropping it off on the other, the way business will throw requirements over the fence to IT. So this would be a completely foreign thing to them, how you can function that way. Everything is managed as products, rather than, again, being managed as projects, because it's the products that embody not a set of activities, but value to the customer. When they open up a new plant, that's a project. When they're dealing with Brexit, that's another project. But the actual delivery of the cars, that's a fact. The actual delivery for, I think, a lot of manufacturers, the actual delivery of the cars is all managed as products. This is an interesting one. Everything is architected around flow. It's okay to have duplication between the lines if it increases your rate of flow, as an example, rather than having this one beautiful, elegant enterprise architecture that meets every need. And is built around technology layers. And then everything is optimized end to end. So car manufacturers know that lead time, the time it takes from the customer order to the car being delivered, is the #1 predictor of their performance, of their staff's happiness, and so on. So, and they measure everything in terms of those business results. So end-to-end flow and business results, rather than, again, these proxy metrics. And by the way, we won't be throwing away our proxy metrics. We still need the agile metrics. We need DevOps telemetry. We need to understand how much each phase takes, but they can't be the primary way that we measure. So I thought I could perfectly apply all these concepts to how we should build software, but it turns out the other thing I learned is that software and cars are a little bit different from this plant. So the business value aspect is basically these widgets that deliver sheer driving pleasure to the customers, but the design and the delivery are completely decoupled. They happen in different buildings in different cities. The cars are designed in Munich, and then they're delivered in this Leipzig plant, and delivered every 7 seconds, but they're designed in annual cycles. And so the creative and the manufacturing process are actually decoupled, which is feeling pretty different than what we're doing in our teams. And they flow across this linear production line, which is why I think oversimplifying things to these DevOps delivery pipelines is kind of misleading when you're talking about creative work where delivery and production are coupled. So now if you imagine your organization, and if you could take this kind of moving MRI of how business value flows through your organization, what would you see? What would the animation be like? We actually studied over 308 different customer value streams, and we actually did some visualizations of how things flow across all the different tools, and then how things cluster in terms of those flows. And what happens is, you actually see these units of value where a lot of the effort and work are spent. Things like the features that will delight your customers. But these things are designed and delivered in daily cycles, or in the cycles of sprints. So it's much, much faster. And in fact, the creative and manufacturing process are one, and they flow across something that we call the value stream network. It's this network of all your teams, of all the individuals, creating this value as you're building things. So the real question that the flow framework attempts to answer is what flows in software delivery? And I think SAFe, and especially SAFe 5.0, actually gives us the right taxonomy of defining all that work and that flow, but how do we abstract that to be a common language with the business side, and a common language that's completely focused on the customer? How do we put that layer above it? So one thing that we know flows is features. Features deliver business value. Customers want to pull those features. They use your mobile solution instead of somebody else's if it gives them more features that delight them. Defects, so fixing defects, are a key part of complex systems. Basically, all complex systems, modern cars will have 20 or 30,000 low-severity defects. I don't know if you have noticed if your Jeep ever stopped on the highway. But the faster that we can fix defects, repair incidents, the better and higher velocity flow that we have, and the more we delight our customers again. The risks are now a first-class part of software delivery, so security, data privacy, GDPR, and so on. And debts, technical debt, infrastructure, even value stream debts themselves. So these 4 flow items are mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive. That means there is zero-sum game. They're all supported by each of the work item types in the flow framework. You might add some ITIL types in there. If you've got a lot of ITIL, you're using other things of that sort, problems, incidents, and changes. But you can basically map all of that work that you've got in SAFe into these 4 flow item types. And so I'll give you an example now how you can use this to help illustrate to your business some of the problems of these trade-offs in this zero-sum game. So when I was first working on this, I was actually with Gene Kim, and he said, Mik, this flow framework, I know you're trying to make it simple, it's still pretty complex, and you want to show it to executives, and the only thing executives understand, in my opinion, is up and down arrows. So this whole illustration of the flow framework will be with up and down arrows. So think of the last time that you had a push to market. And of course, the success of that new product, of that new thing that you're trying to delight your customers with, really does depend on how many great features the teams have delivered, right? There's a reason we obsess about feature velocity and flow. However, as you do that, there's shortcuts that are taken to meet the deadlines, to avoid that cost of delay, and debts and risks rise. And as debts and risks rise, quality goes down. And then this interesting thing happens that I've experienced more times than I'd like to admit, is that defect works takes more and more of the value stream, and you get into this death spiral, where defect work will actually consume all available capacity on that value stream. Feature work will go down to 0. This is exactly where Nokia found itself. And the problem was not that the technologists, basically all the people in the room, you've probably experienced something like this. The problem is that the business doesn't see this. It just so happens that in the tech giants, this is where every single CEO of a tech giant has actually been a former software developer. They kind of innately get that trade-off. We need to help our business leaders understand this as well. So I'll give you a counterexample. This is back in 2003. Bill Gates issued this fascinating, trustworthy computing memo to Microsoft, where this is before we had all the breaches from Target and Capital One that were and other organizations that were front page news. And he said, okay, we're going to stop feature work across our value streams, and we're going to focus on reducing tech debt and risk. And this is something, stop all feature work. I'm pretty sure this is something that none of, basically, no enterprise IT CEO has ever said yet to date, right? We're going to stop focusing on delivering new value. But Bill Gates understood that trade-off. If that didn't happen, Microsoft could go the way of Nokia. There were already enough blue screens of death at the time, and security was about to make things even worse. So the company, for the better part of a year, focused entirely on debt reduction, architecture work, those kinds of enablers. And debts and risks went down. We actually got things like Windows Update and a whole lot of internal work. And keep in mind, it was not possible to just re-platform all of Microsoft because Microsoft has been around since the dawn of the age of software. That company probably has more legacy than any other company on the planet since they basically kicked off that age. But they were able to incrementally reduce that debt and, as a result, become an innovator and actually become the most valuable public company as they are today. So the interesting thing is that these trade-offs were understood, not just at the level of technologists, not just at the level of people who get Agile, but actually at the business level. And other companies have actually had these same near-death experiences where replatforming too late would have destroyed them, right? Replatforming too late destroyed Netscape. These are the companies who made it through those near-death experiences because they understood these trade-offs. So the question is, how do we basically take this and make it possible to take it into organizations and have them understand why these concepts are so important, why what you see in Say 5.0 is so important to deploy, not just at the level of how Agile teams work, but at the level of the business. And that's really the goal of the flow framework, is to elevate this with a simpler language, where you've got these 4 flow metrics and flow distribution. What you do is you set up, per safe, your product value streams. You make sure your product value streams are truly end-to-end, all the way from business to the customer. And then for each of those, you set a flow distribution. So if you need something that has to have fast feature flow, you need to probably go cloud native. You need to do A/B testing. If you've got some old legacy code, well, maybe you'll just focus on risk reduction in that particular value stream. So you start measuring things per value stream rather than making these assumptions that you need 20% tech that work everywhere, or containerize and make everything cloud native. And then you measure these 4 flow metrics: flow velocity, how much of each flow item is being done, again, just by plugging into the work items that are flowing through Safe; flow efficiency, so how many wait states versus active work there is; flow time and flow load. And so I'll just illustrate this to you really quickly. And the first one, I'll illustrate through a story that that one of our customers told about a year ago at another conference. So this was Nationwide Insurance. They told this great story at the DevOps Enterprise Summit where we helped them measure across their product value streams how long it was taking to deliver value. And it was taking about 120 days, which, it seems like a long time, especially if you've been working in a company where you can do this every 2 weeks. But that wasn't actually the big problem. Because the problem was that the CIOs were seeing this 120 days, and they thought, okay, we need to hire way more developers. We should be able to cut this way down. And that is the gut reaction, is that we just need more developers, or we need more developer talent. But then we actually looked into where the flow efficiency, where the work and wait states were. And the more surprising thing was only 2.5% of that time was spent in development. So if you're now hiring developers and have any notion of the theory of constraints, you're seeing that there's a pretty big disconnect here. You could have double the developers. Nokia could have double the developers. Nothing will move any faster because you're not investing in the constraint. And the problem is you're not seeing the constraint. So the key thing here is to actually understand flow time so that you know where the constraint is, where the wait states are. And flow time, by the way, it's a little bit different. Lead time starts when there's a request. We already know that the number of requests that we have in our backlogs are so massive, we need to start the flow time clock when work begins, when business analysis begins, when design begins, not when coding begins. It's not code to commit to code deploy. That's a cycle time. But when work begins on the value stream and it stops when we've got running software. Now, the next thing that we want to understand is where was the bottleneck? Because was the bottleneck that security reviews were taking too long? There was a change advisory board. Again, we've got these gut feelings and reactions, and it ended up being somewhere completely different. And by the way, it could be different for different value streams. So once you start looking at those wait states, again, you've got that now in, say, 5.0, you actually start seeing the answer because we might have these reactions that, well, we don't have enough DevOps automation. We don't have enough CI/CD. In this case, for one of the key and most important product value streams, it was the fact that there were too few designers. Developers were waiting on designers, or worse yet, doing what, when we made this mistake at Tasktop, our developers were doing, which is opening up Photoshop. And this is not the best use of their time, it turns out. So by actually seeing this, we started looking at, okay, well, what is your ratio of developers to designers? Because we know that with how important modern systems of engagement are, companies like Atlassian have moved from one designer to 25 developers to 1 to 9, and so on. So where are you in this? And you'll look inside your organizations, you actually see that you might be in 1 to 150. You might be 1 to 50, and that's probably not enough. But you don't know that till you actually start seeing where your flow efficiency bottlenecks are. So, and you do that, again, by measuring not just in development, but across the value stream, that active work versus the wait states. So another key question that comes up that this can help answer is, why is delivery slowing as we add more developers? So this unfortunately happens too often. And we've now seen enough of this and seen enough of the data. The majority of cases with large-scale software is that the software architecture is not aligned to your value streams. Right? Dean gave us, I think, a really good visual and even a cute movie of what happens when your organization hierarchy is not aligned and how you actually have to create this second operating system and how you can use SAFe as a catalyst for that second operating system. The other thing that needs to underpin faster flow is to make sure that your software architecture is aligned to that. If a developer has to go talk to 20 people to make a single change to a database table, guess what? They won't have fast feature flow. So the key thing is that you actually start, once you've defined those product value streams, you actually start measuring dependencies between those product value streams and see how they affect wait states. And that's what should shape your software architecture like it does BMW's, rather than, again, these perfect, massive enterprise architectures. And you can find that through looking through the flows velocity bottlenecks. Another one is, why are the teams working on this product less happy? What we saw, what you can now actually forensically see with Nokia's employee engagement scores, is that technical debt was causing too high a flow load. I skipped over that metric really quickly, but flow load is the work in progress metric. So a bunch of these ideas not only are inspired by Dean and the framework team's work, but also inspired by Donald Reinertsen, who taught us the cost of what happens when things queue up, when we put too much load on our teams. And when you start actually measuring, one of the business result metrics, I skipped over those a little too quickly as well, the business result metrics are cost, the value for a value stream, so the actual dollar value, the number of daily active users you've got, whatever the value metric is, the cost for that product value stream, the quality, and then the happiness of the staff working on that product value stream. We've actually seen these very obvious correlations between too high a flow load, so too high a WIP, and developers and other specialists being unhappy because they're trying to get those features done. That's exactly what happened at Nokia. But if they're now thrashing, if they're not able to get enough of them done because of architecture or other problems, they actually get less happy because they tend to be motivated by delivering great software. So I'll now give you an example of a few different diagnostics that will just give some more concrete examples to these flow metrics. This happens to be our value stream at Tasktop. All our work enters the value stream, and as you can see here, through Salesforce. So we've got customer requests in there. Those will go through a product management tool. These can be any tool. There you've got target process. You can have tools like PlanView, work that's done in Jira. Doesn't quite matter what the tool chain is, but the key thing is we've got SAFe implemented across whatever the tool chain is. And then from that, we can extract the data because all of the data around flow is actually in those tools. It's not in the project plans, it's in the tools where people do their work. And I'll give you a quick story of a diagnosis that we had to make earlier in the year around one of the products that we were launching. So you can see there, that flow load metric for this product value stream. I should also mention one more thing. The product value streams, they're bigger. They're meant to be bigger than your feature teams. Generally, we see them be between 1 and 10 feature teams, agile teams, and so on. And they'll include other specialists. They include infrastructure. They include support. They include designers and business analysts. But back in April, we saw our flow load spike. And this was not so surprising because this was going to be the first public, the first beta actually release of this particular product. And so, of course, like anyone else, we want that thing to be great. We want as many features in there as possible. The product managers are pushing for that. We like to think we know better, but you see basically in the same sprint, the flow time go an order of magnitude higher. So it's, again, Reinhard Stern told us this already many times, but we're now seeing the inefficiency caused by an overly high flow load. The difference, though, is it's not in some book, it's visible right away. So the team is able to react quickly and say, we're never going to get this done. It's now taking us 10 times longer to finish any of the feature because the teams are completely thrashing, trying to get everything done. So that's now visible. And then, of course, we want to remediate this. So the only way we had of doing that is to actually staff this value stream more, to bring more developers onto it. So we started doing that. But there was an interesting twist here because this was one of our new products, and we decided that we wanted a more modern architecture, and we chose new programming languages for it. So we chose a programming called Scala and TypeScript. Those seemed like great decisions. And then we're seeing developers go onto this. Most of our developers have a Java background, and we're not seeing a higher flow velocity. So myself, our VP of product development, kind of start panicking a little bit. And we start saying, well, we told you Scala's too new. We're never going to be able to find enough talent locally. Our headquarters is in Vancouver that knows Scala. And so we're basically a day away from telling the product value stream. There's, in the book, it says they should have autonomy. We kind of forgot that day as well. Telling the product value stream leads that we got to pull Scala. We got to go back to Enterprise Java. It'll take, probably a few sprints, but we got to do it. The teams told us, no, look, we know it doesn't look that way yet. The teams are actually ramping up. It's a little bit slower on Scala, but we actually think we'll get the velocity back up. And so they said that. We said, okay, you've got 2 or 3 more sprints. Please, we hope this is true. And it was. They were able to show us with data that they were right and we were wrong. So I think making all of this visible is what's so key. And then again, things like technical debt, making that trade-off of technical debt visible, that when you start reducing technical debt, you do that to increase your feature velocity, right? We no longer make any investments in enablers, in architecture, in technical debt, if we don't have a hypothesis that feature velocity will increase within a time span we care about. And we never care about looking out further than a year because software changes and markets change too quickly. So we can actually now see those investments happen. And I think the key thing I want to get across now is that you've got the tools to actually start deploying this today, right? SAFe, 5.0, especially with these new additions, captures the way that you and your organizations need to work to do this. So what I'm going to do right now is quickly walk through the key points from project to product and show you how you can actually use SAFe 5.0 as your blueprint for implementing those. So first of all, the key thing is to, again, I think you're hearing this over and over, but I think it's one of the most important things to take back from this conference is get your organization, even though you're agile in the middle, you need your organization to be lean and agile end to end. You need the business thinking that way, as we've heard in numerous talks. Otherwise, you've really got these waterfall processes with agile in the middle. You need a flow orientation across your product value streams to be truly customer-centric. And that's exactly what we've got with value streams and flow in SAFe. You need, again, it's not that projects won't go away. You might be stuck in a project funding model for some time, but you basically need to get that direct visibility to business value, to a measurement of business value in your product value streams. And again, that's exactly what we've got in this direct mapping from a portfolio vision into these portfolio backlogs, and then the value streams that deliver on them at that SAFe portfolio level. This can be slightly more advanced, but I think is a key part of the journey that some large companies are already undertaking. You move away from project budgeting, where you assume you know the future for the next year or two, which is just wrong, given where we are in the age of software and how quickly things are changing, to the notion of lean budgets that's really clearly defined in SAFe. And companies are doing this. Microsoft, every 6 months, reallocates resources between value streams. At Tasktop, we have an annual budget we give to our board, but every quarter we reallocate, we move teams between value streams. We never want to blow up teams, that's way too expensive, but moving a team between value streams can be very effective if your priorities change. And again, the economic framework in SAFe is a perfect guide for that. And then the key thing is, one of the big failures of project management is that you're bringing people to work rather than bringing work to people. You're not giving those teams a chance to storm and form a norm. And a principle that we use is that, unlike what we saw in many of our customers, where developers would be assigned to 12 different projects, 14 different projects, 8 of which were in maintenance mode, 4 of which weren't, and thrashing all the time, you only ever assign a person to a single value stream. Right? You allow those teams a chance to get a grip on the complexity, to understand technologies that they use, to really understand those handoffs, because a lot of those have to do with team building and collaboration, as we've heard of. And again, the right abstraction there is not a feature team is a value stream. It's not. That's too small. You won't ever get enough specialists. You need to make these things broader, and you can do that through the agile release trains. So finally, there's the architecture, because this does keep coming up. You will keep noticing this as an impediment, because we've been growing our architectures, not in software architectures, not in a value stream-centric way, but in too much of an enterprise architecture-oriented way. So as you separate out your different layers of products, you'll notice you have external products that are facing your business, internal products like APIs and shared services and data pipelines, and then you actually start treating your delivery tools, what we call your value stream network, as a product as well. Your delivery pipeline, your agile tool chain, because your bottlenecks will come there. And this quote from Satya Nadella is very, very telling, where tech giants, successful companies, invest disproportionately at the bottom and the middle, whereas enterprise and IT organizations invest disproportionately at the top. So Microsoft, as an example, has 3,500 people working in the developer tools division. BMW's most important product is not the car, it's the plant. So by seeing your value streams and allowing them to shape your software architecture and understanding where the dependencies are, it'll actually help you make those kinds of investment decisions. So now to wrap up, I just want to speak about where some of this could end up. And I gave some predictions in terms of in the 50th anniversary issue of IEEE software around what could happen as we basically, hopefully at some point, exit that turning point and get into this era of wealth generation that's past that, and the technology dissemination. So I'll just quickly run through these. I think one key thing is that this era of invention that's felt like such a frenzy throughout all of our careers will actually shift to an era of adoption. So these rapid cycles of innovation, where there's a whole new programming paradigm, like object-oriented programming or something, those will actually slow. The productivity benefits of a new programming languages will be 5 or 10%. There won't be another 10x. So things are actually going to stabilize. Things have stabilized in companies, so production at scale is always mastered in the turning point. That's what happened with the lean movement in mass production. That's what's happened already within the tech giants, within some of the unicorns, some of these tech startups. The issue is it's just not evenly distributed yet. So really the question, or the key thing right now is run as quickly as you can to adopt those world-class practices, right? In Say 5.0, you've got these world-class practices for bringing agility to your teams and to your business and scaling that. And the cost of delay, we need to think of not just as for the features that we deliver, the products that we launch, but the cost of delay of not moving to these modern practices is tremendous. And the companies who are slow to adopt those new practices, things like Safe, things like cloud, actually may not survive the next decade. They will rapidly decline. So again, move fast because the practices have been established. You heard Dean talk about this some yesterday. The complexity will grow. And growing complexity drives growing specialization. So 150 years ago, something was wrong with you, you'd go to a doctor, and there was one type of doctor. Today, the Association of American Medical Colleges has 120 different types of medical specializations. We're going to see that, and that's why it's so important to think of these value streams as being cross-functional and collaborative. So software is going to become core to every business. We'll have specialized data modelers, specialized programmers focused on machine learning for that particular domain. As that happens, and this is again a key thing and a key theme at this conference, you need to elevate that lean thinking and now even computational thinking to the entire organization. So again, you're bringing in that through the value streams and through what we're seeing is this diversity that's needed within the value streams of specializations and of people. And really, I think the key thing, and Dean's the one who pointed this out to me, the key way to think about that structurally is to deploy the second operating system. Use Say 5.0 as a catalyst, but the key thing is you're deploying that second customer-centric, values-oriented operating system. So again, the whole goal now is to bring your organization through the turning point. Carlota Perez, in her models, she stated that each of those turning points ended in a golden age. There was some period where what happened is either the new masters of production, their grip weakened and other companies learned how to become innovators. And that's really the whole goal. Help your company become the innovator. Dean said yesterday that we've got kind of two futures, right? One future is we get stuck in this turning point and in 10 years, all of us in this room are working for 10 trillionaires, or we will bring some of those practices to organizations and help them become software innovators. And so I think that's really our opportunity and our responsibility now to do that as quickly as we can. I think if we don't do that, again, our organizations, if we keep stuck in these old operating models that were created 2 revolutions ago, this notion of Taylorism and managing innovation and delivery and our people that way, the organizations that remain stuck in that will just decline over time because those practices that have really been overly entrenched in IT will not survive the turning point. The shift from project to product can be a catalyst for this because it forces this more horizontal, this move to a second operating system that will align around customer value and around innovation and force you to start spotting those bottlenecks and those wait states. And the way that you do that is by measuring end-to-end flow. Again, be thinking end-to-end, be taking that customer's perspective, and use Say 5.0 as your catalyst to do that, because reinventing Agile frameworks rather than leveraging what's there is a recipe for failure. So with that, thank you very much.